everyone. Welcome back to another week of ReEngage. Thank you so much for being here and taking this intentional time to work on your marriage. And I know that you'll be so happy when you hear this week's topic and you get to hear a bald man talk to you about sexual intimacy. So here we go. One thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is this idea of the two roads issue when it comes to marriage, that you and your spouse have taken two very diverse, different roads. And then all of a sudden, when you get married, we say, hey, here's these two roads. Let's get you guys together, and everything's supposed to just work out swimmingly. But what happens is these two different roads have had such different ways of experiencing life, from their family of origin to how they experience God, how they think about things, positive and negative experiences, other relationships. And so all these things just really can make people very unique, obviously. And we often hear in times about marriage that the opposites attract. And so that's what happened. And all of a sudden saying, hey, just get along. You should figure this out. So we obviously have to do some work on that. But one of the things that really can be very divergent on these two roads is how we've experienced sexuality along the way. Let me give you some examples. Some of us might have lots of experience in the arena of sexuality. Some of us may have no experience or very little. Or we both might have lots of experience, and that really forces us to think about sex in a unique way from our varied experiences. Some of us might have grown up in a Christian home and may have misunderstood the teachings of the church about Christianity, and therefore we carry with a lot of guilt, a lot of pain, a lot of shame when it comes to sexuality, so that it affects how we think about sex. And some people may have grown up in a home where the idea of thinking about God and sex was just non-existent. We might have, unfortunately, cases of abuse in our past that massively influence how we think about sex. We might have addictions that massively influence how we think about sex. So one of the things we have to do is not just assume, hey, partner, you should think the same way I do. We have to lean into the fact that they've had a very unique road to get there. And so we've got to kind of understand that road. And it's a shame on us for just expecting them to think like I do. But we got to understand them. And the other thing that's interesting about sex is that we think there's a certain pattern of the way it should take place, maybe based upon our experiences. Typically, and a lot of men experience sexuality this way, is there's a thought that comes into their brain about sex, or maybe the wind has changed direction and makes them think about sex. And so there's a thought, and so that leads to feeling kind of turned on a little bit, and that leads then to pursuit of your partner, and that leads then to sex with your spouse. But other people may not think the same way. It doesn't mean one is right and one is wrong, one is bad, one is good. It's just different ways of thinking about it, because I noticed that a lot of people might have this pattern when it comes to sexuality. That there has to be this idea of pursuit first, like I'm feeling cherished and feeling valued. And when that happens, then there's the thought about sexuality. And then maybe there's the turning on moment, and then the sex takes place. And so the same four terms, the same four things are just in a different pattern. And yet we might get frustrated, like, why isn't your pattern the same as mine? So you can see, because of all these things on these two roads that people experience, the way they think, how this can ultimately be a really tough deal for us to navigate. And then it seems like a lot of couples I work with, there's kind of two different levels of desire. So a lot of times there's one person we call a high desire person. They're kind of thinking about sex, wanting to talk about sex, wanting to pursue sex all the time. It's kind of on the forefront of their mind. They're a high desire type of person. And a lot of times their spouse is someone that is a lower desire person. They're a person that's not always on the forefront of their mind. They kind of need that pursuit first before that thought takes place. So you can see where there might be frustration, where there might be frustration in your marriage, where there might be frustration in your relationship. And so I think sex can be a sign in our relationships of great closeness, of great oneness, of great peace and wholeness in our relationships, but can also, I think, a lot of times, unfortunately, be a sign of great strain and hurt and pain in our relationships. And so there's no wonder that there's a lot of people that are becoming sex therapists, because this is a major issue that a lot of people are dealing with. And the nice thing is, I think the Bible gives us very clear direction on maybe how we can solve this problem, maybe how we can remedy this situation a little bit better than maybe our frustrating ways of the past. So I'd like to read to you a passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 1 through 6, and it says this. It says, now regarding the questions you asked in your letter, and this is from the Apostle Paul. He says, yes, it is good to abstain from sexual relations, but because there's so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. So now in the context of marriage. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to his wife. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. Afterward, you should come together again so that Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. So I think there's some really good principles that we can pick up from Paul's teachings here to us about sexuality and marriage. And I think one of the things that really stands out to me is he's saying that it's very easy for our sexual energy to go to different places, but he's saying one of the best things, one of the purest things you can do is have all your sexual energy go toward your spouse, go to your partner. So we need to make sure all of our sexual energy is directed in that direction. That's one thing. And I think he's also clearly saying that sex needs to be a part of our marital relationships. It should not be something that we kind of discount or think, maybe, maybe not. But it should be a vital part of our relationships. And if it's not, we probably need to figure out how to get it to be a vital part. The other thing I think he's saying is that sex needs to be an area where we think about our partner's needs. What are my partner's needs? What are their desires? We need to find that out. We need to ask them questions. We need to pursue that. And again, all that is saying that sex is an important part of marriage. Let's really be diligent and look at that. Excuse me. There was an interesting thing that I found on the internet a few years ago, and no, not that, but there was this guy that decided he was frustrated. He was probably the high desire sexual partner in his relationship. His wife was the low desire. He was getting frustrated with all the times he was asking his wife for sex, and she was saying no. So he decided, unfortunately, one month to keep an Excel spreadsheet of these experiences, and so he would kind of ask every day. There was 2 or 3 times that they did have sex, but the rest of the times he just wrote down the excuses like, I'm tired, I'm feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, the kids are wearing me out, whatever the excuses would be. He just would write all those things down, and then stupidly at the end of that month he decided to give that chart to his wife and to show, hey, look at all the times you've turned me down, look at all the times I've asked, woe is me. Well, that didn't go very well. She got very upset. And then even more stupidly, a word? I think it's a word. But anyway, whatever it is, they decided to put this out on the internet for the world to see and weigh in. Well, obviously there are some people that very much sided on the husband's side, like I can't believe he has this strong sexual desire and he's being turned down all the time. And other people sided with the wife and say, what a selfish you-know-what, because he's not thinking about her needs at all. He's only thinking about himself. So as we hear that story, I wonder maybe what side you might side on, and that might tell you whether you're the high desire or low desire, but I have a feeling you already know what you might be. So it's not a good idea. So what would be a proper response? What would be a proper way if we're having these 2 different paths that are very conflicting and very different? How do we navigate that? And so one of the things we might start with is just even with some basic information that I get asked all the time, and I hear people asking all the time, how often should a healthy couple be having sex? Well, it's very difficult to answer because depending on circumstances and all these different things, but I think it should be a regular part of our marriage relationship. And so if it's not happening frequently, once a month, once a week, whatever and each couple is so unique, but you need to sit down and have a conversation about what's going on in your brain, about what you think would be a decent amount of time to be having sex, and have that conversation. But it's very difficult to answer that. But each couple is unique in their journey, and each couple needs to have that conversation. And we'll get to that question a little bit later. But I think the ultimate goal beyond how many times should be this. The goal that we should have is to cherish and pursue your spouse without any strings attached. Cherish and pursue your spouse without any strings attached. There's a phrase that's been going around for a while, and I think there's some value to that, and I don't want to generalize or stereotype too much, but this idea. Women need to feel loved to have sex, and men need to have sex to feel loved. So let's look at that first part. Women need to feel loved to have sex. You know, I've talked many times about John Gottman, this great marriage researcher, and he talks about in marriage that if we have enough negative experiences, we kind of get into what he calls negative sentiment override. And so when we're in negative sentiment override, anything that happens, we interpret it negatively. And so one of our things that we have to do is, especially if women fall in this category of needing to feel loved to have sex, is what are we doing to get them out of that negative sentiment override? What are we doing to make them feel positive, loved, not because of their body, just because of who they are? What are we doing to cherish them, to value them? And that needs to be our goal. Not so that we can get sex, Not so we can get anything from them, but our goal is to learn how to love this other human being and cherish them and value them. And what happens then, again, we're not pursuing to have sex, but as people feel cherished and valued and loved, then they're more open to that idea, because then the pursuit leads to the thought, which leads to the desire, which leads to the being turned on in the sex. And so are we navigating that incorrectly? So we need to think about that. And men need to have sex to feel loved. Unfortunately, it seems like for men, they feel closest to their spouse the moments after sex. That's when they feel so close to them. And so oftentimes it's a way for someone, a man typically, to feel honored by having sex, to feel cherished, to feel valued. And so again, we must ask our question, no matter whether we're on the high desire side, the lower desire side, the thought first, the pursuit first, whatever side we're on, what am I doing to cherish and pursue my spouse without any strings attached? I'm not pursuing them sexually so that they'll be kind to me later. I'm just pursuing them because this person is worthy of love. And I'm going to trust God with that. And so maybe some practical ideas is a lot of times that maybe the high desire is always asking, it kind of wears the other person out. So maybe set up a schedule, create anticipation. Maybe like Tuesday nights is going to be, or Tuesday mornings, whenever it's going to be, is going to be a time, a scheduled time. And I know that seems a little unsexy or lusty or whatever it would be. I'm sorry for the lack of terms there. But man, if the desire is sexual experience, that's still kind of what we're after. Discover times that are best. Maybe have that conversation. When is best for you? The morning, the evening, when the kids are sound asleep. When is best for you? Are you stressed in the mornings before work? Maybe the weekends, whatever it be, to have those conversations. The other thing to do is to really continually, when we get frustrated about the sexuality of our partners, continue to draw that circle around ourselves and say, what can I do to be better with this person? And so if you're a person that's a high desire person, maybe think of that. What are you doing to put them in a positive? How many positive comments, positive things are you doing for them? And one thing it might be a good idea is, I know my wife loves when I rub her back, give her a hand massage. But if I always take that and turn that into a sexual encounter, that can start to feel disingenuous to her, like I'm doing that to get to her body. And so maybe think about ways to make her feel cherished and valued that doesn't lead to sex. So that might be something we do as we draw the circle. Maybe if you're the lower desire person, it might be to think, boy, I know that means a lot to them. What could I do to, maybe I'm not always thinking that, but maybe start to think about initiating sex with them or being more open to them or whatever. But a lot of it comes down to probably having a great conversation and talking about sex. So one of the things that's interesting is Henry David Thoreau makes this quote about those two roads. He says, could a greater miracle take place for us than to look through each other's eyes for an instant? And so that's really what we're after, is to look through the other person's eyes and gain their perspective, and hear their experiences and kind of see where they're from, and kind of then think, how then can I pursue them in a way that is meaningful for them? And how then can I grow in my experiences and start to move a little bit in their direction? So I want to put a question here, and it's a question from our ReEngage lesson curriculum, but I think it's a great question. And so here's the question. Maybe sit down sometime this week and ask your spouse about how they feel about your physical intimacy. And the goal here is just to learn their perspective, not to defend yourself, not to rebut, because that's usually going to go poorly, just to listen. Ask them, what are the biggest barriers to intimacy and what you can do to address them? And so I think that is a great thing to say, whether you're high desire or lower desire, just to hear what are some barriers that maybe could get us to this spot where our physical intimacy could be at a little bit better place. I'd like to also give you some resources, because there's a lot of knowledge that needs to be taken in, a lot of change that needs to take place on our part. There's a book called Sheet Music by Brian Layman. It's about Christian sexuality. I haven't read it in years, but I remember reading it and thinking it was a good book, and so let me know what you think. Gary Thomas, my author that I love, he wrote a book called Cherish, How to Value Your Spouse Without Sexuality. There's a podcast that I listen to by a friend of mine, Dr. Corey Allen. And he does a podcast called the Sexy Marriage Radio, or Sexy Marriage Radio. And he's got a doctorate and a therapist, and he helps us think from that perspective. He's also very Christian, and it helps us think about sexuality in a relationship. He's very straightforward. There's no hiding behind things. He just says it like it is, but it's a great conversation that he and his wife have. And so I would encourage you to check out some resources, find some good resources for like that. So here's some goals going forward from tonight. And so if you're the high desire spouse, your goal is to think about how this week can I just cherish that person without using sex, words of affirmation, physical touch, whatever it would be. If you're a person that's the lower desire, maybe thinking about how I can serve my spouse a little bit better when it comes to the sexual arena. Maybe it's having a conversation because maybe that's awkward for you. Maybe think about initiating, whatever it would be. How can I begin to open up this world for us a little bit more? And work to make things better in your sex life by maybe talking about these resources, maybe seeing a therapist if it really is an area of need. And so hopefully this can be helpful because I know, like I said, this can be an area of great frustration. But think about how we can honor God in this regard. Thank you. And my dog barks right on cue as we end. Bye.